The voice carried across the empty California plains like a ghost from another lifetime, haunting and beautiful in equal measure. Owen Quillen reined in his horse at the crest of the ridge, his weathered hand moving to shield his eyes from the blazing June sun, as he scanned the valley below for the source of that ethereal sound. It was 1883, and he had been riding for 3 days straight from Randsburg, tracking a mare that had broken free from the livery stable. But what he heard now made him forget all about the missing animal. The song was in Spanish, a melody that spoke of longing and loss, and it drifted up from the ruins of what had once been the Martinez farmhouse. Owen knew the place well enough. The family had abandoned it 2 years ago after a fire had gutted half the structure, leaving behind blackened timbers and crumbling adobe walls. No one had any reason to venture out here anymore, which made the singing all the more peculiar. He touched his heels to his horse's flanks and guided the animal down the slope, his curiosity overriding his caution. As he drew closer, the voice grew clearer, and Owen realized it belonged to a woman. The song was melancholy, but sung with such pure emotion that it sent a shiver down his spine despite the heat. He dismounted about 50 yards from the ruins, not wanting to startle whoever was inside. Tying his horse to a scraggly mesquite tree, he approached on foot, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The singing stopped abruptly. Owen froze, waiting, listening. For a moment there was only silence, broken by the occasional buzz of insects and the whisper of wind through the ruins. Then he heard a different sound, the scrape of movement, quick and furtive. "Hello," he called out, keeping his voice steady and calm. "I do not mean any harm. I heard singing and wanted to make sure everything was all right." More silence. Owen took another step forward, rounding the corner of what remained of the farmhouse's front wall. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. A young woman stood in the doorway of the least damaged section of the building, one hand gripping the doorframe as if ready to bolt at any moment. She was perhaps 20 years old, with long dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and brown eyes that watched him with a mixture of fear and defiance. Her dress was worn and patched in several places, the fabric faded from what might once have been a deep blue to a tired gray blue. Despite her obvious poverty, there was something striking about her, a kind of dignity in the way she held herself. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice still carrying traces of the beauty he had heard in her song, though now it was edged with suspicion. "My name is Owen Quillen," he said, holding his hands away from his sides to show he was unarmed, or at least that he was not reaching for the revolver at his hip. "I work at the livery in Randsburg. I was out tracking a lost horse when I heard you singing." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze taking in everything about him from his dusty clothes to his sun-weathered face, to the honest expression in his blue-gray eyes. Owen was 30 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with light brown hair that tended toward blonde in the summer and a face that was more rugged than handsome. He had been told he had kind eyes, though he had never paid much attention to such things. "You should go," the woman said finally, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. "Are you living here?" Owen asked, unable to keep the concern from his tone. He looked past her into the shadowy interior of the ruins, seeing what appeared to be a makeshift living space. There was a bedroll in one corner, a small collection of cooking implements, and a few other possessions that spoke of someone trying to make do with very little. "That is none of your business," she replied, but she did not move to close the door or retreat inside. Owen ran a hand through his hair, trying to think of what to say. He was not particularly good with words, had always been more comfortable with horses than people, but something about this situation demanded he try. "Look, I can see you are on your own out here, and that is a hard way to live. Randsburg is not a big town, but we have got decent folks there who would help if you needed it. I do not need help, she said, lifting her chin. I am managing just fine. He wanted to argue, to point out that living in a burned-out farmhouse miles from anywhere was hardly managing fine, but something in her expression stopped him. He recognized that look. It was pride, the same kind of fierce pride he had seen in his own reflection during the hard years after his parents had died and left him with nothing but debts and a failing ranch. He had been 18 then, barely more than a boy, and he had refused every offer of charity that came his way, determined to make it on his own. He had lost the ranch in the end, but he had kept his pride, for whatever that was worth. "What is your name?" he asked instead, softening his tone. She hesitated, clearly debating whether to answer. "Paloma," she said at last. "Paloma Alvarez." "That is a pretty name," Owen said, and meant it. "Paloma, it means dove, does it not?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "You speak Spanish, a little," he admitted. "Enough to get by." "I grew up working alongside a lot of Mexican ranch hands, and they taught me what they could. I am not fluent, but I know my way around the basics." Paloma's posture relaxed slightly, though she still maintained her wary distance. "Why are you really here, Owen Quillen? And do not tell me it is just about a lost horse." He could not help but smile at her directness. "Well, it was about the horse when I started out this morning, but I will admit that hearing someone singing in an abandoned farmhouse got my attention pretty quick." "Are you sure you are all right out here? This is rough country, and being alone like this, especially for a woman, it is dangerous." "More dangerous than the alternatives," Paloma said quietly, and there was something in her voice that spoke of experiences she would rather not remember. Owen nodded slowly, understanding more than she had said. "Fair enough. I will not press you on it, but would you at least let me bring you some supplies? Some food, maybe a few other things that might make your life easier. No strings attached, no questions asked. Just one person helping another." "Why would you do that?" Paloma asked, genuine confusion in her eyes. "You do not know me." "Maybe that is reason enough," Owen said. "I have been in tight spots before, and I remember what it was like when people were kind for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. Consider it paying forward a debt I owe to the world." For a long moment, Paloma just looked at him, and Owen had the distinct impression he was being measured against some internal standard she had set. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I would not turn down some food," she admitted. "It has been harder than I expected to find enough out here." "I will come back tomorrow," Owen promised. "And if you ever want to talk, or if you need anything else, you just have to ask. I am at the livery most days, and I am boarding at Mrs. Henderson's place on the north end of town. Anyone can tell you how to find me." "I am not going into town," Paloma said quickly, that wariness returning to her expression. "You do not have to," Owen assured her. "I will bring things out here. Like I said, no strings attached." He could see her struggling with whether to trust him, and he understood the conflict. Trust was a luxury that people in difficult circumstances could rarely afford. But something in his honest face and straightforward manner must have convinced her, because she nodded again, more firmly this time. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very kind of you." Owen tipped his hat to her, a gesture of respect that made something almost like a smile ghost across Paloma's features. "I will see you tomorrow, then. Stay safe out here." He turned and walked back to his horse, very aware of her eyes following him the whole way. As he mounted and rode back toward Randsburg, his mind was full of questions about the mysterious young woman living in the ruins. What had driven her to such desperate circumstances? Why was she afraid to go into town? And why did the sound of her singing, continued to echo in his mind long after the farmhouse had disappeared from view. The sun was setting by the time Owen made it back to Randsburg, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to set the desert ablaze. The town was small, barely more than a collection of buildings clustered around the main street, but it had grown in recent years thanks to the silver mines in the nearby hills. Owen had been living here for 5 years now, ever since he had lost his family's ranch and needed to find a new way to make his living. Working at the livery was honest work, and he was good with horses, which made it a natural fit. He stabled his horse and made his way to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, where he rented a small room on the second floor. The elderly widow who ran the place was in the kitchen when he came in, and the smell of her cooking made his stomach growl in appreciation. "Owen, dear, you are back late," Mrs. Henderson said, looking up from the pot she was stirring. She was a plump woman in her 60s with gray hair always pinned up in a neat bun and a motherly manner that made most of her boarders feel at home. "Did you find that mare?" "Not yet," Owen admitted, washing his hands in the basin by the door. "But I will head out again tomorrow to keep looking." "You work too hard," Mrs. Henderson clucked, but there was affection in her tone. "Sit down and have some supper. You look like you could use a good meal." Owen did not argue. He took a seat at the long table where the boarders ate their meals together, and Mrs. Henderson soon placed a heaping plate of beef stew and fresh bread in front of him. 2 other boarders were already eating, both of them miners who worked long shifts in the hills and rarely had much to say. Owen ate in companionable silence, his thoughts drifting back to Paloma and the haunting beauty of her song. After dinner, he went up to his room and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling in the dim light of his oil lamp. He had told Paloma he would bring her supplies, which meant he needed to figure out what to bring and how to pay for it. His wages at the livery were not generous, but he had always been careful with money, and he had managed to save a little over the years. He could afford to spare some of it for someone in need. The next morning, Owen was up before dawn. He did his usual work at the livery, mucking out stalls and tending to the horses, and then he asked his boss, a gruff man named Carl Warner, if he could take a few hours off in the afternoon. "That missing mare still on your mind?" Carl asked, squinting at Owen with shrewd eyes. "Yes, sir," Owen said, which was not quite a lie. The mare was still out there somewhere after all, even if she was not his primary concern at the moment. Carl waved him off. "Go on, then, but do not make a habit of it." Owen promised he would not, then headed to the general store. The proprietor, a man named Thomas Fletcher, greeted him with a nod as he came in. Owen spent the next 20 minutes carefully selecting items: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, a few cans of preserved peaches, and some other staples that would keep well and provide decent nutrition. He also picked up a wool blanket, knowing that even in the summer, the desert nights could get cold. The total cost made a noticeable dent in his savings, but he did not hesitate as he counted out the coins. "Stocking up for something?" Thomas asked as he wrapped the purchases in brown paper. "Just helping out a friend," Owen said, keeping his answer deliberately vague. He did not want to start gossip about Paloma, sensing that she valued her privacy for good reasons. With the supplies packed in his saddlebags, Owen rode out to the farmhouse. It was another hot day, the kind where the sun seemed to press down on everything with an almost physical weight. He found himself wondering how Paloma was managing in the heat with so little shelter. The ruins of the farmhouse would provide some shade, but not much, and he worried about her having enough water. As he approached the farmhouse, he heard no singing this time. For a moment, fear clutched at his chest. What if she had moved on? Or worse, what if something had happened to her? But then he saw movement in the doorway, and Paloma emerged, shielding her eyes against the sun as she watched him approach. Owen dismounted and untied the bundles from his saddle. "Good afternoon," he called out. "I brought those supplies I promised." Paloma came forward slowly, her expression guarded but not unfriendly. She was wearing the same dress as yesterday, and Owen noticed that her feet were bare, the hem of her skirt dusty from the desert floor. She looked at the bundles in his arms with something like wonder. "This is too much," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It is just enough," Owen replied. "Where would you like me to put it?" She led him inside the ruins, and Owen got his first real look at her living conditions. It was worse than he had imagined. The section of the farmhouse she was using had a partially intact roof, which provided some shelter, but the walls were cracked and crumbling, letting in drafts and dust. Her possessions were pitifully few. The bedroll he had seen yesterday, a dented pot, a tin cup, and a small bag that probably held what little food she had been able to scavenge or buy. There was a makeshift fire ring made of stones just outside the door, and Owen could see the remains of a small fire there. He set the supplies down carefully on the cleanest part of the floor, then turned to face Paloma. In the dimmer light inside the farmhouse, he could see her more clearly, and what he saw made his heart ache. She was thinner than he had realized, her cheekbones prominent and her wrists delicate to the point of fragility. There were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. "Thank you," Paloma said, and there was genuine emotion in her voice. "This is more kindness than I have seen in a long time." "Everyone deserves kindness," Owen said simply. He hesitated, then added, "I brought a blanket too. The nights can get cold and I thought you might need it." Paloma's eyes grew bright, and for a moment Owen thought she might cry, but she blinked rapidly and looked away. "You are a good man, Owen Quillen." "I am just a man," he said, uncomfortable with the praise. "And I am happy to help. Is there anything else you need? Anything I can do?" She shook her head. "You have done more than enough. I do not know how I can repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Owen said firmly. "But if you would not mind, I would like to ask you something. You do not have to answer if you do not want to." Paloma looked at him warily. "What is it? How long have you been living out here?" Owen asked gently. She was quiet for a long moment, and Owen thought she might refuse to answer. But then she sighed, a sound so full of weariness that it seemed to come from her very soul. "3 weeks," she said. "I came here 3 weeks ago because I had nowhere else to go." "What happened?" Owen asked, then quickly added, "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to." "I am just concerned, that is all." Paloma walked to the doorway and stood looking out at the desert, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold despite the heat. "My father died 6 months ago," she said, her voice distant. "He was a ranch hand, and we lived in a small house on the property where he worked near Bakersfield. When he died, the ranch owner said I could not stay there anymore unless I married his son." Owen felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "And you did not want to marry him?" "He was not a good man," Paloma said quietly. "He drank too much and had a mean temper. I saw the way he treated the other ranch hands, the way he treated the animals. I knew what kind of husband he would be, so I refused, and the ranch owner gave me 1 week to leave." "That is not right," Owen said, his voice hard. "They should have given you more time, helped you find a situation." Paloma turned to look at him, and there was something almost like amusement in her eyes despite the sadness of her story. "When has the world ever been fair to people like me? I am a poor Mexican woman with no family and no money. I am lucky they did not just throw me out that same day." Owen wanted to argue, to insist that she deserved better, but he knew she was right. The world was not fair, especially to those with the least power to demand fairness. "So you came here." I remembered this place from when I was a child, Paloma said. My father brought me here once to visit the Martinez family. They were kind people. When I heard they had left, I thought maybe I could stay here for a while, just until I figured out what to do next. But it has been harder than I expected. There is no work in Randsburg for someone like me, and even if there were, I do not have the clothes or the appearance to present myself properly. Owen looked at her worn dress and bare feet and understood what she meant. In a town like Randsburg, appearances mattered. People made judgments based on how you looked, and someone as obviously poor as Paloma would have a hard time finding anyone willing to hire her. What if I could help with that? Owen said, an idea beginning to form in his mind. What if I could help you find work? Paloma shook her head. You have already done too much. I cannot ask for more. You are not asking, I am offering, Owen said, and I think I might know someone who could use some help. Mrs. Henderson, the woman I board with, she runs a boarding house. She is getting older, and I know she finds it hard to keep up with all the work sometimes. What if I talked to her about hiring you to help out? Nothing fancy, just cooking and cleaning and such. She could not pay much, but it would be steady work, and she might even be able to give you a room. Hope flared in Paloma's eyes, so bright and sudden that it was almost painful to see. Do you really think she would hire me? I think it is worth asking, Owen said. Mrs. Henderson is a good woman, and she has a soft heart for people in need. If I vouch for you, I think she will at least give you a chance. I do not know what to say, Paloma whispered. This is too much. You do not even know me. Maybe I want to know you, Owen said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. He felt heat rise to his face, aware that he had just revealed more than he intended. I mean, you seem like a good person who has had some bad luck, and your singing yesterday, it was beautiful. Anyone who can sing like that has something special in them. Paloma looked away, but not before Owen saw the flush that colored her cheeks. My mother taught me to sing, she said softly. She died when I was 10, but I remember the songs she sang. Sometimes when I am alone, I sing them to feel closer to her. She would be proud of you, Owen said. Surviving the way you have, keeping your dignity and your pride, that takes strength. Or stubbornness, Paloma said with a small, sad smile. My father always said I was too stubborn for my own good. There are worse things to be, Owen replied. He glanced out at the sun, gauging the time. I should head back to town before it gets too late, but I will talk to Mrs. Henderson tonight and I will come back tomorrow to let you know what she says. Does that sound all right? Yes, Paloma said. Thank you, Owen, for everything. As Owen rode back to Randsburg, he found his mind full of Paloma. There was something about her that drew him, something beyond just the obvious appeal of her beauty, or the sympathy he felt for her situation. It was the strength he saw in her, the determination to survive despite everything working against her. He admired that, and he found himself wanting to know more about her, to understand what made her who she was. That evening after supper, Owen asked Mrs. Henderson if he could speak with her privately. They went into her small parlor, and Owen took a seat on the worn sofa while Mrs. Henderson settled into her favorite rocking chair. "What is on your mind, dear?" she asked, her hands busy with some mending. Owen took a breath, and then launched into his request, explaining about Paloma and her situation without revealing too many details. He was careful to present it in a way that would appeal to Mrs. Henderson's generous nature, while also emphasizing the practical benefits of having help around the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson listened quietly, her needle moving steadily through the fabric in her lap. When Owen finished, she was quiet for a moment, considering. "This young woman," she said finally, "you trust her?" "I do," Owen said without hesitation. I know I have only met her twice, but I am a good judge of character, and I believe she is honest and hardworking. She has just had some bad luck." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "Well, the Lord does say we should help those in need, and I must admit, I could use an extra pair of hands around here. My arthritis has been acting up something fierce lately, and there are days when I can barely manage all the cooking and cleaning." Hope surged in Owen's chest. "So you will give her a chance. Bring her by tomorrow," Mrs. Henderson said. "I will talk to her myself, see what kind of person she is. If she seems like a good fit, I can offer her room and board plus a small wage. Nothing fancy, but enough to live on." "Thank you," Owen said, relief washing over him. "This means a lot, Mrs. Henderson, to both of us." The older woman gave him a knowing look. "You have taken a shine to this girl, have you not?" Owen felt his face grow hot. "I just want to help her." Mrs. Henderson said, but there was a twinkle in her eye. "Well, you are a good man, Owen Quillen, and if this Paloma has caught your attention, she must be something special. Just be careful. Matters of the heart can be complicated." "I know," Owen said, though he was not entirely sure what complications Mrs. Henderson was warning him about. He was not even sure what he felt for Paloma yet. Attraction, certainly, and sympathy, but beyond that, it was too soon to say. The next morning, Owen could hardly contain his impatience as he went through his usual routine at the livery. Every task seemed to take twice as long as usual, and he kept glancing at the sun, willing it to move faster across the sky. Finally, around midday, Carl gave him a nod. "Go on," the older man said gruffly. "I can tell you are distracted today. Just be back before evening feeding time." Owen did not need to be told twice. He saddled his horse and rode out to the farmhouse, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. What if Paloma refused to come? What if she was too proud to accept the offer? He had seen how prickly she could be about accepting help. But when he arrived and told her about Mrs. Henderson's offer, the look on Paloma's face erased all his doubts. It was as if the sun had come out from behind clouds, illuminating her features with pure joy. "She really said yes?" Paloma asked, her voice trembling. "She will give me work. She wants to meet you first," Owen clarified. "But I think if you come to town with me right now, we can get this sorted out today. What do you say?" Paloma looked down at herself, at her worn dress and bare feet, and uncertainty crept back into her expression. "I cannot go into town looking like this. People will stare." "Let them stare," Owen said firmly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Besides, Mrs. Henderson is not the kind of person to judge you by your clothes. She will see what I see, a strong, capable woman who deserves a chance." Paloma bit her lip, clearly torn. Then she straightened her shoulders, and Owen saw that fierce pride return to her eyes. "All right," she said. "I will come, but I need a few minutes to gather my things." It did not take long. Paloma's possessions were so few that they fit easily into a small bundle. Owen helped her pack the supplies he had brought yesterday, and then they set out for Randsburg. Paloma rode behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep her balance. Owen was acutely aware of her presence, of the warmth of her body against his back, and the way her hair occasionally brushed against his neck when the wind caught it. They rode in silence for a while, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Owen could feel some of the tension leaving Paloma's body as they put distance between themselves and the farmhouse, as if she were shedding a burden with each mile. "Are you nervous?" Owen asked over his shoulder. "Terrified," Paloma admitted. "What if she does not like me? What if I do something wrong?" "You will not," Owen assured her. "Just be yourself. That is more than enough." As they entered Randsburg, Owen could feel Paloma tense up again. It was mid-afternoon, and the main street was busy with people going about their business. Owen was aware of the looks they attracted, the way people's eyes lingered on Paloma's worn clothing and bare feet. He guided his horse directly to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, not giving anyone a chance to approach or ask questions. Mrs. Henderson was in the kitchen when they arrived, and she came out to the front porch as Owen helped Paloma dismount. The older woman's eyes took in everything about Paloma in one swift, assessing glance, but her expression remained neutral. "So you are the young woman Owen has been telling me about," Mrs. Henderson said. "What is your name, dear?" "Paloma Alvarez, madam," Paloma said, and Owen was impressed by how steady her voice was despite her nervousness. "Owen tells me you might have worked for me." "Perhaps," Mrs. Henderson said. "Come inside and let us have a talk." "Owen, you can wait out here." Owen wanted to protest, to stay by Paloma's side for moral support, but he knew Mrs. Henderson well enough to recognize a dismissal when he heard one. He nodded and took a seat on the porch steps, watching as the two women disappeared into the house. The wait felt interminable. Owen sat on those steps for what must have been 30 minutes, though it felt like hours. He tried not to imagine all the ways the conversation could go wrong, tried not to think about what he would do if Mrs. Henderson said no. Finally, the door opened, and both women emerged. "Well, Owen," Mrs. Henderson said, and there was a smile on her face that made his heart leap with relief. "It seems you were right about this young lady. Paloma is going to start working for me, effective immediately. I am giving her the small room at the back of the second floor, and she will help with cooking, cleaning, and laundry in exchange for room, board, and $3 a week." Paloma's eyes were shining with unshed tears, and when she looked at Owen, the gratitude in her gaze was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." "I am glad it worked out," Owen said, standing up and brushing off his pants. He wanted to say more, to tell her how happy he was for her, but the words seemed inadequate. Instead, he just smiled, hoping she could read in his expression everything he was feeling. "Now, let me show you to your room," Mrs. Henderson said, taking Paloma gently by the elbow. "And we will see about finding you some proper shoes and maybe a dress or two. I have some old things that should fit you with a bit of alteration." As the two women headed inside, Paloma glanced back over her shoulder at Owen one more time. The look they shared lasted only a moment, but it felt significant somehow, like the acknowledgement of a bond that was beginning to form between them. Over the next few weeks, Owen found himself spending more and more time at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. He told himself it was just convenience since he lived there anyway, but the truth was that he looked for excuses to be around Paloma. He would linger over meals, hoping for a chance to exchange a few words with her as she served the food or cleared the dishes. He would volunteer to help with small repairs around the house, knowing it would bring him into contact with her. Paloma seemed to thrive in her new situation. With regular meals and a safe place to sleep, she filled out a bit, losing that gaunt, haunted look she had worn when Owen first found her. Mrs. Henderson had indeed found her some better clothes, and while they were still simple and worn, they were clean and mended and fit her well. She had shoes now, too, sturdy leather ones that Mrs. Henderson had bought from the general store. But more than the physical changes, Owen noticed a change in Paloma's demeanor. She smiled more easily now, and while she was still somewhat reserved, she no longer carried herself with that defensive wariness that had marked her first days at the farmhouse. She was good at her work, too, efficient and thorough, and Mrs. Henderson sang her praises to anyone who would listen. "That girl is a treasure," the older woman told Owen one evening. "Best decision I have made in years, hiring her. Owen could not help but feel a surge of pride, as if Paloma's success were somehow his own. He found himself looking forward to seeing her each day, to the small conversations they managed to steal when their paths crossed. They talked about simple things at first, safe topics like the weather or the town gossip or the horses Owen worked with at the livery. But gradually, as they grew more comfortable with each other, their conversations deepened. One evening, about a month after Paloma had started working for Mrs. Henderson, Owen found her sitting on the back porch of the boarding house. It was dusk, that magical time when the harsh light of day softened into something gentler and more forgiving. She was shelling peas into a bowl, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency, and she looked up with a smile when Owen approached. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Please do," Paloma said, gesturing to the space beside her on the steps. Owen sat down, stretching out his long legs and leaning back against the porch railing. For a few minutes, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the sounds of the evening settling in around them. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and closer by, they could hear Mrs. Henderson humming to herself inside the house. "I never thanked you properly," Paloma said suddenly, breaking the silence. "For what you did for me, finding me at the farmhouse, bringing me here, convincing Mrs. Henderson to hire me. You changed my life, Owen." "You would have figured something out," Owen said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You are stronger than you think." "Maybe," Paloma said, "but I might not have survived long enough to figure it out. I was running out of food and hope when you found me. Another week or two, and I do not know what would have happened." The thought of Paloma alone in that farmhouse, slowly starving, made Owen's chest tighten with an emotion he could not quite name. "I am glad I heard you singing that day." Paloma turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why did you help me? Really? Most people would have just ridden on by, or if they had stopped, they would have expected something in return. But you never asked for anything. I do not understand why." Owen considered the question carefully. It was something he had asked himself more than once over the past few weeks. "I guess I saw myself in you," he said finally. "Not the exact same situation, but that feeling of being alone and desperate and not knowing where to turn. When I lost my parents' ranch, I felt like I had failed at the one thing I was supposed to do. I felt worthless. And then people helped me, people who did not have to, people who just decided to be kind because they could be. I have been trying to pay that forward ever since." "I am sorry about your ranch," Paloma said softly. "That must have been hard." "It was," Owen admitted, "but it taught me something important. It taught me that material things can be lost, but the person you are, the choices you make, those are yours forever. I would rather be a poor man who helps people than a rich man who does not." Paloma smiled, and it transformed her whole face, making her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her features and everything to do with the warmth that radiated from within. "You are a rare person, Owen Quillen." "I am just me," Owen said, but he could not help feeling pleased by her words. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt different, charged with something new and undefined. Owen was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way the fading light caught in Paloma's hair and made it shine. He wanted to reach out and touch her, to bridge the small distance between them, but he held himself back. It was too soon, he told himself. They had only known each other for a month. And yet, he could not deny what he was beginning to feel for her. As summer turned toward fall, Owen's feelings for Paloma continued to grow. He found himself thinking about her constantly, looking for reasons to be near her, treasuring every smile she gave him like it was something precious. He was falling in love with her, he realized, though he was not sure when it had happened. Maybe it had started that first day when he heard her singing, Or maybe it had been a gradual process, building with each conversation and shared moment. The problem was that he did not know if Paloma felt the same way. She was friendly with him, certainly, more so than she was with anyone else in town. But did that mean she cared for him as more than just a friend? Owen had never been particularly skilled at reading romantic signals, and he was terrified of ruining what they had by declaring feelings that might not be returned. Mrs. Henderson, perceptive as always, noticed his internal struggle. "You need to tell her how you feel," she said to him one day in early September. They were in the kitchen, and she was kneading bread dough while Owen ostensibly helped by peeling potatoes, though he was doing more staring out the window than actual peeling. "Tell who what?" Owen asked, trying and failing to sound innocent. Mrs. Henderson gave him a look that said she was not fooled for a second. "Tell Paloma that you are in love with her. It is as plain as day to anyone with eyes, boy. You moon over her like a lovesick calf." Owen felt his face go hot. "It is not that simple. What if she does not feel the same way? I do not want to make things awkward for her, especially when she is just starting to find her feet here. And what if she does feel the same way but thinks you are not interested because you never say anything, Mrs. Henderson countered. "Life is too short for this kind of foolishness, Owen. If you care about her, tell her. The worst she can do is say no, and even that is better than spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been." Owen knew Mrs. Henderson was right, but knowing and doing were two different things. He spent the next several days working up his courage, trying to find the right moment and the right words. Finally, on a Sunday afternoon when Mrs. Henderson had given both him and Paloma a few hours off, he seized his opportunity. Paloma was in the small garden behind the boarding house, tending to the vegetables Mrs. Henderson grew there. She looked peaceful and content, her face tilted toward the sun, and Owen's heart swelled with affection at the sight. "Paloma," he said, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "Do you have a minute?" She looked up, pushing a strand of hair back from her face. "Of course. What is it?" "I was wondering if you would like to take a walk with me," Owen said. "There is something I want to talk to you about." A flicker of concern crossed Paloma's face. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing like that," Owen assured her quickly. "I just thought it would be nice to get away from the house for a bit, stretch our legs. We could walk out toward the edge of town, maybe watch the sunset." Paloma's expression softened. "That sounds lovely. Just let me wash my hands and grab a shawl." They set out a few minutes later, walking side by side down the dusty street. It was a beautiful afternoon, warm but not oppressively hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and creosote. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, nodding to the few people they passed, until they reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open desert. "I love this time of day," Paloma said, gazing out at the landscape. "Everything seems so peaceful." "It is," Owen agreed. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Paloma, there is something I need to tell you. I have been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks now, but I keep chickening out. So I am just going to say it plain, and if you do not feel the same way, we can just forget I ever brought it up." Paloma turned to look at him, her eyes wide and curious. "What is it, Owen?" "I have feelings for you," Owen said, the words coming out in a rush. "Romantic feelings. I think I started falling for you that first day I heard you singing, and every day since then has just made it stronger. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and when I am with you, I feel like everything is right with the world. I know we have not known each other that long, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I could not keep it to myself any longer. I care about you, Paloma. A lot." For a long moment, Paloma just stared at him, and Owen felt his heart sink. He had made a mistake. He had moved too fast, presumed too much. But then, slowly, a smile began to spread across her face, a smile so bright and joyful that it took his breath away. "I was beginning to think you would never say anything," Paloma said, and there was laughter in her voice. "I have been waiting for weeks for you to give me some sign that you cared about me as more than just a friend." "You have," Owen said, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "You mean you feel the same way?" "Of course I do," Paloma said. "How could I not? You saved my life, Owen. You gave me hope when I had none. And beyond that, you are kind and honest and good in a way that is rare in this world. I started to care for you almost from the beginning, but I was afraid to say anything. I thought maybe you just felt sorry for me, or that you saw me as some kind of charity case." "Never," Owen said fervently. "You are so much more than that. You are amazing, Paloma." They stood there looking at each other, and then, as if drawn by some magnetic force, they moved closer together. Owen reached out tentatively, cupping Paloma's face in his hand, giving her every chance to pull away. But she did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment as if savoring the contact. "Can I kiss you?" Owen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Paloma breathed. Owen leaned in and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of all the emotion he had been holding back for weeks. Paloma responded immediately, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck as she kissed him back with equal fervor. It was everything Owen had dreamed of and more, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard and smiling like fools. "Well," Owen said, a little dazed, "that was even better than I imagined." Paloma laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "You have been imagining kissing me." "Constantly," Owen admitted without shame. "For at least the past 3 weeks." "Good," Paloma said, standing on her toes to kiss him again, quick and light, "because I have been imagining it too." They walked back to town hand in hand, talking and laughing like they had known each other for years rather than months. Owen felt like he was floating, like his feet were barely touching the ground. He had never been happier in his life, and judging by the glow on Paloma's face, she felt the same way. When they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson took one look at their joined hands and clasped faces and smiled knowingly. "About time," was all she said, but there was warm approval in her voice. From that day forward, Owen and Paloma were inseparable. They spent every free moment together, taking walks, talking for hours about everything and nothing, stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. Owen had never felt this way about anyone before, this sense of completeness, of having found the person he was meant to be with. And Paloma seemed to feel the same way. She bloomed under his affection like a flower in the desert after rain, her natural warmth and humor emerging now that she felt safe and loved. As fall progressed into winter, their relationship continued to deepen. Owen met Paloma's few friends from her childhood, people she had reconnected with now that she was settled in Randsburg. Paloma, in turn, became friends with Owen's colleagues at the livery and the other people in town who had been kind to him over the years. They became a known couple, and while there were a few narrow-minded individuals who whispered about the propriety of a white man courting a Mexican woman, most people in Randsburg accepted them without issue. On Christmas Eve, Owen asked Paloma to marry him. He did it simply, without a ring or fancy speech, just the two of them sitting on the back porch of the boarding house under a sky full of stars. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said, taking her hands in his. "Will you marry me, Paloma? Will you be my wife?" Paloma's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen. Nothing would make me happier. They were married in February of 1884 in a small ceremony at the church in Randsburg. Mrs. Henderson stood up for Paloma and Carl from the livery stood up for Owen. It was a simple wedding, nothing fancy, but it was perfect. Paloma wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew from a bolt of blue fabric that perfectly matched her eyes, and she looked so beautiful that Owen could barely speak his vows without choking up. After the ceremony, there was a small reception at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Owen danced with his new wife, holding her close as they swayed to the music, and he felt like the luckiest man alive. This was what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it, this sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than himself. "I love you," he whispered into Paloma's ear as they danced. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Paloma whispered back. "You are my miracle, Owen. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Owen said, because it was true. Paloma had brought meaning and purpose into his life, had made him feel like he mattered in a way he had not felt since losing his parents' ranch. They spent their wedding night in Owen's room at the boarding house, which would serve as their home until they could afford something better. It was not much, just a small space with a bed and a dresser and a single window, but it felt like a palace to Owen because Paloma was there with him. They made love for the first time that night, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence and passion. It was new for both of them, fumbling and sweet and perfect in its imperfection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking in whispers and trading lazy kisses until they finally fell asleep in each other's arms. Over the next year, Owen and Paloma built a life together. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day when they could afford their own place. Owen continued to work at the livery, and Paloma kept working for Mrs. Henderson, who insisted on keeping her employed even after the wedding because she had grown so fond of the younger woman. They were happy, genuinely happy, in a way that neither of them had thought possible when they had first met. In the spring of 1885, Paloma discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after supper, pulling him aside and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby in there," she said, her eyes shining with joy and a little bit of fear. "Our baby." Owen felt like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. A baby. He was going to be a father. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice coming out in a croak. "I am sure," Paloma said. "I have been feeling sick in the mornings and I have missed my monthly courses. I talked to Mrs. Henderson and she agrees that I am probably about 2 months along." Owen pulled Paloma into his arms, holding her tight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, and suddenly he was laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Paloma asked, pulling back to look at his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Owen said. "I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." The pregnancy was not easy. Paloma suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as she grew larger, she found it increasingly difficult to do the physical work required at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson, bless her, was understanding and adjusted Paloma's duties accordingly, giving her more sitting tasks and fewer ones that required heavy lifting or bending. Owen worried constantly. He worried about Paloma's health, about whether they would have enough money to provide for a baby, about whether he would be a good father. But Paloma remained calm and steady, her natural strength carrying her through the difficult moments. "We will figure it out," she would tell Owen whenever his anxiety got the better of him. "We always do." Their son was born on a cold November night in 1885. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Owen feared he might lose both Paloma and the baby. But Paloma was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined. And finally, as dawn was breaking, the baby arrived with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. "It is a boy," the midwife said, placing the squalling infant on Paloma's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Owen looked down at his wife and son, both of them exhausted but alive, and felt tears stream down his face. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him Oscar after Owen's father, with the middle name Antonio after Paloma's. Oscar Quillen came into the world with a full head of dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. And from the moment Owen held him for the first time, he knew his life would never be the same. Parenthood was harder than either of them had anticipated. Oscar was a colicky baby who cried often and slept little, and there were nights when both Owen and Paloma were so exhausted they could barely function. But there were also moments of pure joy, like when Oscar first smiled at them, or when he learned to reach for things with his tiny hands, or when he would fall asleep on Owen's chest, his little body warm and trusting. As Oscar grew, so did their family's prospects. Owen's hard work at the livery had not gone unnoticed, and in the spring of 1886, Carl offered him a partnership in the business. "You have been with me for 7 years now," the older man said, "and you know this business as well as I do. I am getting older, and I am going to need someone to take over eventually. I would like that someone to be you." The partnership meant a significant increase in income, and it also meant security for Owen's family. He accepted gratefully, knowing this was the opportunity he had been working toward for years. With the extra money, he and Paloma were finally able to rent a small house on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, but a place of their own with 2 bedrooms and a little yard where Oscar could play. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Owen worked at the livery, Paloma took care of their home and Oscar, and in the evenings they would sit together on their front porch, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams for the future. They wanted more children eventually, and they talked about maybe one day buying a small ranch where they could raise horses and cattle. In 1888, their daughter was born. They named her Rosa, and she was a calmer baby than Oscar had been, with her father's light hair and her mother's delicate features. Oscar, now nearly 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. It was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful, and Owen could not imagine being happier. The years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Carl retired in 1890, leaving Owen as the sole owner of the livery. It was a huge responsibility, but Owen was ready for it. He had learned well over the years, and the business prospered under his management. They were able to save more money, and Owen began to seriously look into buying land where they could start that ranch they had always dreamed of. In 1892, they found the perfect property. 50 acres of decent grazing land about 5 miles outside of Randsburg, with a small stream running through it, and enough flat space to build a house and outbuildings. The price was steep, but Owen had been saving for years, and with a loan from the bank, he was able to make it work. They broke ground on the house that spring, and by fall they were moving in. The ranch house was modest but sturdy, built to withstand the harsh desert climate. It had 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and a front porch that looked out over the land they now owned. For Owen, it was the fulfillment of a dream he had thought lost when his parents' ranch had failed. But this time, it was different. This time, he had Paloma by his side, and together they were building something that would last. They started small, with just a few horses and cattle, but the ranch grew steadily over the years. Oscar, now old enough to be helpful, threw himself into the work with enthusiasm, learning everything Owen could teach him about caring for animals and working the land. Rosa, still young, helped her mother in the house and garden, though she also loved to follow Owen around and pester him with endless questions about the horses. In 1895, Paloma gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Miguel. He was a happy, easy baby, and he completed their family in a way that felt just right. 3 children, a successful business, and a ranch they owned outright. It was more than either Owen or Paloma had dared to dream of when they had first met all those years ago in the ruins of the Martinez farmhouse. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, before Miguel was born, Owen and Paloma took a rare evening to themselves. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson, who was still spry despite her advancing years and always happy to watch her adopted grandchildren, and rode out to the old farmhouse where they had first met. It was strange being back there after so many years. The ruins looked even more decrepit now, the adobe walls crumbling further, the timbers blackened by weather and time. But as they stood there in the fading light, Owen remembered that day so clearly. The sound of Paloma's singing, the fear and defiance in her eyes when she had first seen him, the way she had stood in that doorway like she was ready to fight the whole world if she had to. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Paloma asked, slipping her hand into Owen's. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, and sometimes it feels like yesterday." "I know what you mean," Owen said, squeezing her hand. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not heard you singing that day? If I had just ridden past?" "I try not to," Paloma admitted. "It is too frightening to think about, but I do know this. I was meant to meet you, Owen. All the bad things that happened, all the hard times, they led me to this place at exactly the right moment for you to find me. That cannot be a coincidence." "Maybe not," Owen said. "Maybe it was fate or divine intervention or just dumb luck. But whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." They stood there for a while longer, watching as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Then Owen turned to Paloma and took both her hands in his. "I love you," he said, the words he had spoken 1,000 times, but that never got old. "I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Paloma said, tears shining in her eyes. "You are my everything, Owen, my friend, my love, my home. You gave me a life when I had nothing, and every day with you is a gift." They kissed there in the ruins, surrounded by the ghosts of what had been, and it felt like a reaffirmation of everything they had built together. Then they mounted Owen's horse and rode back toward their ranch, toward the home and family and life they had created through love and hard work and sheer determination. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1897, and both Owen and Paloma mourned her deeply. She had been like a mother to both of them, and her loss left a hole in their lives. But they took comfort in knowing she had lived a good, long life and had been surrounded by people who loved her. The children grew. Oscar became a tall, strong young man who loved working the ranch and dreamed of one day expanding their operation. Rosa grew into a beautiful and spirited girl who had inherited both her mother's singing voice and her father's way with horses. Miguel, the baby, was smart and curious, always reading when he could get his hands on a book and asking questions about everything. By 1900, Owen was 47 years old, and Paloma was 37. They had been married for 16 years, and the love between them had only grown stronger with time. They had built a good life, a life neither of them had thought possible when they were young and struggling. They owned a prosperous ranch, had 3 healthy children, and were respected members of their community. One evening in the summer of 1900, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset, Paloma leaned her head on Owen's shoulder. "Do you remember what I was singing that day you found me?" she asked. Owen thought back, trying to recall. It had been 17 years, but some memories stayed crystal clear. "It was in Spanish," he said. "Something sad about longing." "It was a song my mother taught me," Paloma said. "About a woman waiting for her love to return from a long journey. I was singing it because I felt so alone, and I wanted to remember that once someone had loved me. My mother, my father. I wanted to remember that I had been worth loving." Owen tightened his arm around her. "You have always been worth loving, always." "I know that now," Paloma said. "But back then I was not so sure. You changed that, Owen. You showed me my own worth by seeing it yourself. That was the greatest gift you ever gave me, even more than saving my life." "You gave me gifts too," Owen said. "You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be the best version of myself I could be. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You changed all that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of evening settling over the ranch. Inside, they could hear their children laughing about something, Oscar's deep voice mixing with Rosa's higher tones and Miguel's excited chatter. "We did good, did we not?" Paloma said, a note of pride in her voice. "We did better than good," Owen replied. "We did amazing, and we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, years to watch our children grow and maybe even become grandparents someday, years to keep building this life we created together." "I cannot wait," Paloma said, tilting her face up for a kiss. Owen obliged, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was familiar and comfortable but still capable of making his heart race. After all these years, she still had that effect on him, and he hoped she always would. As the stars began to come out overhead, Owen thought back to that day 17 years ago when he had heard singing coming from an empty farmhouse. He thought about the lonely, frightened young woman he had found living in those ruins, and the man he had been then, searching for something without knowing what it was. Neither of them could have imagined how their lives would unfold from that chance meeting, how much love and joy and struggle and triumph lay ahead. The years continued their steady march forward. In 1902, Oscar married a local girl named Sarah, and they built a small house on the ranch property. Owen was delighted to have his son staying close, working the ranch together like he had always hoped. Rosa, at 17, was being courted by several young men in town, though she had not yet settled on any one of them. Miguel, at 7, was proving to be an excellent student and showing a talent for mathematics that impressed his teachers. The ranch continued to prosper. Owen had a good reputation for breeding quality horses, and people came from all over the region to buy from him. The cattle herd had grown to a respectable size, and they were making a comfortable living. It was everything Owen had worked for, everything he had dreamed of during those years, when he thought he would never have anything of his own again. In the spring of 1903, Sarah gave birth to Owen and Paloma's first grandchild, a little girl they named Lily. Owen held his granddaughter for the first time and felt tears prick his eyes. She was so tiny, so perfect, with wispy blonde hair and blue eyes that would probably darken as she grew. When he looked up and met Paloma's gaze across the room, he saw his own wonder and joy reflected back at him. "We are grandparents," he said, almost unable to believe it. "We are," Paloma said, coming to stand beside him and stroke one finger gently down Lily's soft cheek. "Can you believe it? It seems like just yesterday we were holding Oscar for the first time." "Where does the time go?" Owen wondered aloud, But even as he asked the question, he knew the answer. The time went into living, into building and growing and loving. It went into every sunrise watched from the porch, every family dinner around the table, every kiss goodnight, every crisis weathered and joy celebrated. The time went into creating a life worth living, and by that measure, Owen and Paloma had spent their time well. Rosa married in 1904, choosing a young man named Thomas Wright, who worked as a clerk in one of Randsburg's growing businesses. It was a good match, and while Rosa and Thomas moved to a house in town rather than staying on the ranch, they visited often, and Rosa remained close to her family. Miguel grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young man. He went away to a teacher's college in San Francisco in 1908, the first in their family to pursue higher education. Owen and Paloma were immensely proud of him, even though they missed having him at home. He returned every summer to help on the ranch, and his letters during the school year kept them updated on his progress and adventures in the big city. By 1910, Owen was 57 and Paloma was 47. They had been married for 26 years, and time had changed them in the ways it changes everyone. Owen's light brown hair had gone mostly gray, and he moved a bit slower than he once had, though he was still strong and capable. Paloma had a few silver threads in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but Owen thought she was more beautiful than ever. She had a grace and confidence that came from years of being loved and valued, and when she smiled, she still lit up every room she entered. They were sitting on their porch one evening in June, the same kind of warm summer evening that had marked so many significant moments in their life together, when Paloma brought up the old farmhouse again. "I heard that someone finally bought the Martinez property," she said. "They are going to tear down what is left of the old farmhouse and build something new." "That is probably for the best," Owen said. "Those ruins have been standing for almost 30 years now. It is past time for something new to take their place." "I know," Paloma said. "But I cannot help feeling a little sad. That place was important to us. It is where our story began." Owen took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Our story did not begin in that farmhouse," he said gently. "That was just the setting. Our story began when two people who needed each other found each other at exactly the right moment. The place does not matter as much as what happened there." "You are right," Paloma said, "but I would still like to go back one more time before they tear it down. Would you come with me?" "Of course," Owen said. "We can ride out there this weekend if you like." So on Saturday afternoon, they rode out to the old farmhouse together, just as they had done on their 10th anniversary and a few other occasions over the years. It had become a sort of tradition for them, a way to remember where they had started and how far they had come. The ruins were in even worse shape now. The adobe walls had crumbled to barely waist height in most places, and the remaining timbers were so weathered and rotted that they looked like they might collapse at any moment. It was hard to believe anyone had ever lived here, even temporarily. They walked through what remained of the structure, Owen pointing out where he had first seen Paloma standing in the doorway, Paloma showing him where she had kept her meager possessions and built her cooking fires. They talked about how scared they had both been, how uncertain of the future, how impossible it had seemed that anything good could come from such desperate circumstances. "But it did come," Paloma said, standing in what had once been the doorway. "So much good, more than I ever could have imagined." "More than either of us could have imagined," Owen agreed. He stood behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on top of her head. "We have had a good life together, Paloma. A really good life." "The best," Paloma said, covering his arms with her own. "I would not change a single thing." "Not even the hard parts?" Owen asked. The struggle, the fear, the times when we did not know if we were going to make it, not even those, Paloma said firmly, because they led us here. To this moment, to this life, to everything we have built together. Every struggle made us stronger. Every fear we faced and overcame made us more confident, and every moment of doubt was answered by our love for each other. Owen turned her around in his arms so he could look at her face. "I love you," he said, the words as sincere as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I love you more than I have words to say." "I love you too," Paloma replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Always and forever, no matter what." They kissed there in the ruins one last time, a kiss that held 27 years of love and life, and everything they had shared. Then they walked hand in hand back to their horses and rode home to their ranch, to the family and community they had built, to the life that had grown from the seeds planted on that day so long ago when a lonely cowboy had heard singing from an empty farmhouse. The years that followed were full of continued blessings. Oscar and Sarah had 2 more children, giving Owen and Paloma a total of 3 grandchildren from them. Rosa and Thomas had twins, adding 2 more grandchildren to the family. Even Miguel eventually married, bringing home a school teacher named Catherine he had met in San Francisco, and they settled back in Randsburg, where Miguel took a position teaching at the local school. The ranch remained successful, though Owen gradually turned over more of the day-to-day operations to Oscar as he got older. He still loved working with the horses, and he could often be found in the stables or the corrals, but he was content to let his son handle the business side of things. Paloma remained active and involved in the community. She had become known for her singing over the years, often performing at church services and community events. She also taught several of her grandchildren to sing, passing on the songs her mother had taught her and keeping that tradition alive for another generation. As they entered their 70s, Owen and Paloma slowed down considerably. There were days when Owen's joints ached too much to do more than sit on the porch, and Paloma sometimes needed an afternoon nap to keep up her energy. But they were still healthy for their age, still active, still very much in love. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1934, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a huge party, held at the ranch with what seemed like half of Randsburg in attendance. There was food and music and dancing, and Owen and Paloma were the center of attention, holding court and accepting congratulations from everyone they knew. At one point in the evening, when things had quieted down a bit and most of the younger children had been put to bed, Oscar stood up to make a toast. "I want to say something about my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "I know everyone has their own love story, their own tale of how they met and fell in love. But I have got to say, I think my parents have one of the best stories I have ever heard." He paused, looking at Owen and Paloma with affection and respect. "My father heard my mother singing in an abandoned farmhouse and stopped to help her when she had nothing and no one. He gave her a chance when most people would have just ridden on by. And my mother, despite everything she had been through, despite having every reason to be bitter and closed off, she had the courage to trust him, to let him into her life." Oscar raised his glass. 50 years later, they are still together, still in love, still supporting each other through everything life throws at them. They have built an incredible life together, raised a family, created a legacy that will continue for generations. They have shown all of us what real love looks like, what commitment means, what it takes to build something that lasts. He looked directly at his parents. "Thank you for being an example to all of us. Thank you for showing us how to love, how to work hard, how to never give up no matter what. We love you both so much. To Owen and Paloma. Someone shouted, and suddenly everyone was raising their glasses, the chorus of voices calling out their names and their congratulations. Owen looked at Paloma and saw tears streaming down her face. He was not doing much better himself. They had built all of this family, this community, this life. It had started with a song heard from ruins, and it had grown into something beautiful and lasting and more valuable than all the gold and silver in California. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet again, Owen and Paloma sat on their porch one more time, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to build. 50 years, Paloma marveled. It seems impossible. Best 50 years of my life, Owen said. And if I could do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Even the scary parts? Paloma asked with a small smile, echoing their conversation from years earlier. Especially the scary parts, Owen said, because they brought us here. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. Then Paloma began to sing, soft and low, the same song Owen had heard that day 51 years ago when he had first found her. Her voice was older now, not as pure and strong as it had been in her youth, but it was still beautiful, still full of emotion and meaning. Owen listened, his eyes closed, and felt transported back to that moment when he had first heard that voice carrying across the empty plains. He had been 30 years old, lonely and searching for something without knowing what it was. And then he had found her, or maybe she had found him. It did not really matter who had found whom. What mattered was that they had come together at exactly the right moment, two broken people who had healed each other and built something beautiful from the pieces. When Paloma finished singing, Owen opened his eyes and smiled at her. "That was beautiful," he said. "It always is." "I was singing it for you," Paloma said. "The way I was singing for my lost love that day you found me, except you were not lost. You were right there, waiting for me to find you. We found each other," Owen said, taking her hand, "and we built a life that most people only dream of." "We did good, Paloma. We did real good." "We did," Paloma agreed. "And we are not done yet. We still have time, Owen. Time to watch our grandchildren grow, time to hold great-grandchildren, time to sit on this porch and watch sunsets together." "I cannot think of anything I would rather do," Owen said honestly. "As long as I am with you, I am home." They sat together as darkness fell completely, the stars coming out overhead one by one until the sky was filled with them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, they could hear the soft sounds of the horses settling in for the night. It was peaceful and perfect, a moment of pure contentment. Owen and Paloma lived several more years together, each day a gift they treasured. They watched their family continue to grow and thrive, took joy in the simple pleasures of daily life, and never took for granted the love they shared. When Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1939 at the age of 86, Paloma was beside him, holding his hand and singing softly, the same way she had been singing that day he found her. She followed him 2 years later, her heart simply giving out one quiet morning as she sat in the chair by her window, looking out at the ranch they had built together. She was 78 years old, and she died with a smile on her face, her last thoughts of Owen and the life they had shared. They were buried side by side in the Randsburg Cemetery, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, "Owen Quillen and Paloma Quillen, together in life, together in eternity." Their love was their legacy, and it was true. The legacy they left was not just the ranch or the family they had raised, though those things were important. The real legacy was the example they had set, the proof they had provided that love could overcome any obstacle, that two people committed to each other could build something beautiful, and lasting even from the most desperate of beginnings. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell their story for generations. The tale of the lonely cowboy who heard singing from an empty farmhouse and found the love of his life living in the ruins. It was a story of hope and courage and the power of one person to change another's life, simply by choosing to care. It was a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the California desert, and it reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most extraordinary things can come from the most ordinary moments. The ranch continued to be run by the Quillen family for decades after Owen and Paloma's deaths. The old farmhouse where they had first met was long gone, replaced by something new, but the memory of what had happened there lived on. And on summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the desert, people sometimes swore they could hear singing, faint and beautiful, carrying across the plains like a ghost from another time. But it was not a ghost. It was a memory, a reminder of a love that had been strong enough to survive anything, to overcome every obstacle, to build a life and a legacy that would endure long after the two people who created it were gone. It was the echo of a song heard from ruins, the beginning of a story that had no real ending because true love never really ends. It just transforms, becoming part of the fabric of the world, influencing and inspiring everyone it touches. And so the story of Owen and Paloma Quillen lived on, a testament to the power of love, the importance of compassion, and the truth that sometimes, when you least expect it, you can find everything you have ever wanted in the most unlikely of places. All you have to do is be brave enough to stop and listen when you hear someone singing in the ruins.